I'm writing this now, 2 years after it happened. Even after all this time, I can still hear their voice in my head, calm and deliberate, as if they were narrating my fate. Maybe this will help me understand what happened, or maybe it's just to warn anyone else who thinks the world is a safe place. I don't answer unknown numbers anymore, and I've moved 3 times since that night. But the feeling hasn't left me. The feeling that no matter where I go, they'll find me again. Because whoever they weren't random. They knew me, and they knew exactly how to dismantle everything I thought was safe. If you're reading this, you should know something up front. I didn't escape unharmed. Physically, sure. But the scars they left aren't the kind that show. Christmas had always been a bittersweet time for me. That year, it felt heavier than usual. Mom had passed in the spring after a long battle with cancer, and my dad had practically begged me to come to Florida to spend the holidays with him. But I needed space. I told him I wanted to reflect, to honor Mom in my own way. The truth was, I didn't want to be the person who dragged down his attempt at holiday cheer. I booked a cabin in the mountains, one of those rustic rentals that advertise cozy seclusion. The pictures made it look perfect, a small living room with a stone fireplace, a fully stocked kitchen, and snow-dusted pine trees surrounding the property. The nearest town was 10 miles away, which sounded ideal. Just me, a stack of old movies, and a few days of peace. The drive up was uneventful, but the cabin itself felt a little different than I expected. It was nice, sure, but there was something off. The walls were lined with faded floral wallpaper, and the furniture looked older than it should for a rental. The air smelled faintly of something metallic, though I chalked it up to old pipes. Still, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. I wasn't used to being alone in a place like this. It was Christmas Eve, just after 8 p.m., when my phone rang. I was halfway through It's a Wonderful Life, sipping cocoa by the fire. The number was unfamiliar, but I figured it was a holiday call from someone I'd forgotten to save in my contacts. Maybe an old friend or one of Dad's neighbors. "Hello?" I said, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder as I stirred my cocoa. At first there was silence. Then a voice, low and measured, broke through. "Do you know what you've done?" I froze. It wasn't an angry voice, but it wasn't friendly either. It was calm in a way that felt calculated, like whoever was speaking had rehearsed the line. "I think you have the wrong number," I said, forcing a laugh to hide my unease. The voice didn't miss a beat. "You always say that, but it's never true, is it?" "Excuse me?" I said, my voice sharper now. They laughed softly and the sound crawled under my skin. It wasn't a natural laugh. It was deliberate, like they wanted me to hear every note of it. "I'll call back when you're ready," they said, and the line went dead. I stared at my phone, the call log still glowing on the screen. I told myself it was a prank, a bored teenager or someone drunk dialing strangers. But the way they spoke, so personal, left me uneasy. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself I was overreacting. I locked the doors, turned up the volume on the movie, and poured another cup of cocoa. The fire crackled warmly, but the room felt colder somehow. The silence between movie scenes felt oppressive, pressing in on me like a weight I couldn't shrug off. At 8:30, the phone buzzed again. Same number. This time I didn't answer right away. My finger hovered over the screen as the phone vibrated in my hand. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but another part, a darker, more curious part, wanted to know what they'd say. I answered on the 4th ring. "Look, I don't know who you are, but—" "You never know who I am," the voice interrupted. "That's the problem." My heart pounded. "I'm hanging up." "No, you're not," they said, and I hated how certain they sounded. I hung up anyway, slamming the phone onto the coffee table like it was burning me. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, waiting for it to buzz again. It didn't. By 9 a.m., I'd convinced myself it was over. Whoever they were, they'd had their fun and moved on. I grabbed the kitchen knife and set it on the arm of the chair, more for comfort than anything else. The fire was dying down and I didn't feel like getting up to stoke it. I just wanted to sleep, to put this whole weird night behind me. Then my phone chimed. A voicemail. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the play button. Against my better judgment, I pressed it. "You think locking the doors will help?" the voice hissed. "I've been inside before." I dropped the phone, my stomach turning over. The words echoed in my head. I've been inside before. My mind raced. Was it possible? Had someone been here earlier? The cabin wasn't big, and I'd checked the doors and windows when I arrived. There was no sign of a break-in, but that didn't mean they hadn't been here before me. I grabbed the knife and searched the cabin, my heart pounding in my ears. The living room, the kitchen, the bathroom. Nothing. The bedroom was empty too, the bed neatly made, untouched. I even climbed into the attic, coughing as I sifted through dust-covered boxes and old furniture. There was no one here. But that didn't mean I felt safe. I sat by the fire until it burned out completely, gripping the knife like it was the only thing tethering me to sanity. My phone sat on the coffee table, dark and silent. I stared at it, willing it not to ring again. When the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, I finally felt like I could breathe. I grabbed my phone, determined to call the police now that it was daylight. Maybe they'd take me seriously, even if it was just a prank. That's when I saw it. A new photo in my camera roll, time-stamped 3:33 a.m. My blood ran cold as I opened it. It was a picture of me, asleep in the armchair, the knife resting uselessly in my lap. The fire had burned down to embers, casting faint shadows on the walls. But it wasn't the picture itself that terrified me. It was the reflection in the window behind me. A figure, tall and motionless, stood in the shadows, watching me. When I showed the photo to the police later, they seemed skeptical from the start. They didn't say it outright, but their questions implied I was making it up. Had I been drinking? Had I possibly dozed off and imagined it? One officer even suggested I might have taken the photo myself and forgotten. But they couldn't explain the figure in the reflection. The cabin owner was more help at first. He seemed genuinely alarmed when I showed him the image. He promised to look into it and even refunded my deposit. But then he stopped answering my calls. It wasn't until a few days later, when I tried him again, that I got a reply. An abrupt email stating he couldn't help and asking me not to contact him further. That's when I started piecing together the real horror. I couldn't let it go. Something about the voice on the phone, the way it seemed to know me, know what I would do, kept playing in my mind. I looked up everything I could about the cabin, about the town, even the phone number. Nothing turned up. The number was unregistered, and the cabin's history was unremarkable. It had been a rental for decades, owned by the same family. No murders, no strange disappearances, just a quiet, forgotten place in the woods. But then I noticed something strange in the photo. At first, I had been too focused on the figure in the window to notice, but when I zoomed in, I saw the faint outline of something on the coffee table next to me. A scrap of paper. I hadn't left any paper there. I hadn't even brought anything like that with me. It hadn't been there before I fell asleep. I enlarged the image as much as I could, squinting at the blurry text. The words were barely legible, but two stood out clearly. "Come back." I know how it sounds. Believe me, I do. But I couldn't help myself. Something about that note felt like a challenge, like the person behind it wanted me to return. And as stupid as it seems now, I felt like I needed to prove to myself that it wasn't real, that it was just some elaborate prank. So a week later, I drove back to the cabin. The weather was colder this time, the snow piling up on the narrow mountain roads. I told myself I'd just take a quick look around, maybe find some clue I'd missed before. I parked in the same spot, my breath fogging in the icy air as I approached the door. It was unlocked. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for the note on the coffee table. It wasn't the scrap of paper I'd seen in the photo. This was a full sheet, folded neatly in half, with my name written on the front in black ink. My stomach turned as I unfolded it, my hands trembling. The message was short but unmistakable. "Do you remember now?" Unsettling memories. I didn't understand. Remember what? I searched the cabin again, tearing through drawers and closets, looking for some kind of explanation. But there was nothing new, nothing that made any sense. Until I opened the attic door. The musty smell hit me immediately, the air colder up there than in the rest of the cabin. I climbed the ladder, shining my flashlight into the shadows. The boxes and old furniture were still there, undisturbed. But something was different this time. A rolled-up carpet in the far corner, barely visible under the dust. I unrolled it, my heart pounding in my chest. At first I thought it was empty, but then I saw the stains. Dark, irregular patches soaked into the fabric, almost black against the faded beige. I recoiled, but as I backed away, my foot hit something solid. I looked down and saw a small, leather-bound book. A diary. The handwriting was small and precise. The entries dated decades ago. Most of it was mundane. Notes about the weather, hunting trips, repairs to the cabin. But as I flipped through, the tone began to change. The writer started mentioning a guest, someone who had stayed at the cabin longer than expected. The entries grew more erratic, filled with paranoid ramblings about how the guest couldn't be trusted, how they needed to be dealt with. The final entry stopped me cold. I did what I had to do. No one will find them. But sometimes, I think I can still hear them crying. Maybe it's just the wind. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that diary, but eventually, I heard the sound that still haunts me to this day, my phone ringing. The same number. I answered without thinking, my voice shaking as I whispered, "Who are you?" The response was instant, as if they'd been waiting for me. "You should know by now," the voice said. "After all, you were there too." I dropped the phone, my mind racing. You were there too. What did they mean? Then it hit me. The dream. I'd had a dream the first night I stayed at the cabin, though I hadn't thought about it much since. In it, I was standing in the attic, holding something heavy in my hands. There was someone else there, a man, tied up and pleading with me. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I remembered the way he looked at me, his eyes wide with terror. In the dream, I hit him. Over and over. But it wasn't a dream, was it? I stumbled out of the attic, clutching the diary, the phone still ringing somewhere behind me. My vision blurred as memories I couldn't explain began flooding back. The cabin, the man, his screams. I didn't just stay at the cabin that Christmas. I'd been here before, years ago. And the person I'd killed wasn't just some random guest. He was someone I knew, someone I had a reason to silence. But the details were still hazy, like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite fit together. The phone went silent, and the cabin seemed to close in around me. I ran to my car, the diary still in my hand, and drove away as fast as I could. The memories haven't stopped since that day. They come in flashes, the weight of the carpet as I dragged it to the attic, the sound of the man's voice begging me to stop, the overwhelming certainty that what I was doing was right. But I don't know why I did it, or who the man was. The diary is gone now. I burned it the day I got home, but I still get calls from that number. Sometimes they don't say anything. Sometimes they laugh. And sometimes they ask the same question that keeps me up at night. Do you remember now? I tried to move on after that Christmas, to bury what I'd uncovered as deeply as I could. I told myself it was some sick prank, an elaborate hoax designed to mess with my head. But the truth always has a way of clawing its way back to the surface, no matter how much you try to smother it. I've spent years piecing together fragments of memory, cross-referencing them with news articles, even hiring a private investigator to look into my own past. What I've learned has only confirmed my worst fears. The cabin wasn't just any rental. It was connected to a case that went cold over a decade ago. A missing person who disappeared around Christmas. A man whose description matches the one in my dream. A man I now know wasn't just a stranger. He was someone who had wronged me, though the specifics of his betrayal remain elusive. Maybe I've blocked it out, or maybe the truth is too horrible to face. But the clues I've gathered paint a chilling picture. I went to the cabin that year with a purpose, and I carried it out with chilling precision. The calls still come, especially around Christmas. I've changed my number, moved cities, even tried therapy. Nothing works. They always find me. And every time the voice on the other end asks the same thing, "Do you remember now?" The answer is yes. I remember everything. I remember the cold weight of the hammer in my hand, the way the man's pleas turned to guttural sobs, the eerie calm that settled over me when it was done. And I remember the way I buried it all, literally and figuratively, in the attic of that cursed cabin. But there's something else, something worse. I think the voice on the phone isn't someone trying to torment me. It's me, a version of myself I've tried to bury, clawing its way back to the surface. The truth is, I've been running from something inside me, something I can't escape. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't outrun it. Maybe I finally answered one of those calls. Maybe I went back to the cabin. Maybe I couldn't live with what I've done any longer. It doesn't matter now. What matters is this: don't go looking for the truth if you're not ready to find it. And for the love of God, don't ever, ever pick up a phone on Christmas Eve.